Welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
And I'm Luke.
We're here to talk about all things beekeeping. Usually we start with what we've been doing around the yard. And this week, I did kind of the last apiary jobs.
It's the last hurrah of fall.
Yes, it was still 60-something degrees out. We had a couple of 60-degree days. It was sunny. So I got out there and did my last checks. I did some, I went through the cutouts. We did some late, when did we do the late cutouts? September?
Yeah. We don't usually like to do those because the bees don't fare real well for that late of the year.
And by farewell, he means we were 0-2.
Yeah, so these didn't make it.
So I don't know where they went. I know I had a queen for one group. It was a pretty big group. The second cutout we did was smaller. We did not have a known queen for those. One got put in a 10 frame with all the honey resources on top that they robbed out. The smaller group got put in a 6/6 styrofoam, and they stuck around. The big one didn't stick around. So I took there was really no resources in the 10 frame. It got all robbed out, which was fine. Like, it went to my yard anyway. And then the 6 frame, they stuck around, but there was didn't seem to be any queen activity. So then I went through the rest of the hives, not all of them, just the ones at the end that I thought was my smallest. And they only had like probably 4 or 5 frames right in the middle of the 10 frame they were working. And so I went through and pulled those frames out and then combine that down into a 6-frame styrofoam, move some frames over from that other, the cutout frames.
Did you newspaper combine them for all of that?
Nope.
Or no? You just picked them up and moved them?
Just picked them up and moved them because I'm talking maybe a frame of bees. Like, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't think they had a queen, so I'm not anticipating
They are not.
a big...
Before all those listeners go out there and look and there's no eggs and they panic, they're basically shut down for the year right now. There's not a lot of forage out there, although I did see some posts on people that had some late blooming flowers that bees are picking off forage off of. But largely, they're done with forage for the year. There's no real pollen. There's no real nectar. And it's pretty cold. So even when they land and pick up some of that stuff, they don't, especially if it's been if the temperature of the fluid they're picking up is below 50 degrees, they don't fly back off, right? You'll see them kind of lethargic, kind of wandering around. So, and so like combined this time of year, I think that's kind of normal for this time of year.
So that's, so I went through, I haven't put foam on yet. I have it sitting in the yard. We still had a couple of 60-degree days, but they've threatened some snow showers in the weeks coming up here before Thanksgiving, so it'll be rapidly approaching time to wrap up some hives. So
yeah, I'll be making fondant. I'll probably put out a video this week on how I make fondant. And I'll do a little bit of pollen for a protein source for them.
Yeah. Not
a huge amount because I don't want to kickstart hive production, right?
Yeah, I think with it getting late, as dark as early as it gets, they really take a lot of cue from the sunshine.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to issue with a huge hive beetle group that's in my hive. Like we've had a lot of hive beetles. I actually talked to a large beekeeper here. I would call him large, right? He's 5 times my size or so. Actually more than that. Anyway, large beekeeper locally, and I was talking to him about, hey, what are the things that you saw this year? And one of the things that he brought up was hive beetles. So he actually had 3 hives that he said that actually got slimed out by hive beetles this year, and he's never seen that before. So there are changes in weather that we're going through, and that is going to cause a change in the hives. So hive beetles in the past, not really an issue in Illinois. Usually right in fall, like right as the first days of fall hit, that's when you see hive beetles in the hive. And I saw quite a few hive beetles in hives this year.
We had at least 2 people that I know of had hives that came up slimed
Yeah, and usually
they
they're
were
real weak.
weaker hives to start with. Yeah.
But this one, he said he had 3 strong hives that all got slimed, and that's unusual. Now, for the slimed hives, I've discovered this year because I helped somebody out with one, that you can lay out the honey far away from the hive, and the bees do seem to clean that up.
Yeah,
pretty
we talked about that on a previous episode.
Yeah, so
If you missed that, you can go back probably 4 or 5 episodes and find that where we talked about that this summer. The other thing I did was I took the opportunity to clean the old bee suit. I have an old I don't know what you call it, canvas.
Canvas.
White.
It's the Dayton original canvas white suits.
And I bought that when I first started beekeeping in 2008.
I've got mine too. It sits there in the corner. It's got like a torn pocket, and the sleeves elastic is all worn out.
It's my best hood.
Yes, the hoods are awesome.
The hoods are awesome.
And
I've had
for whatever reason
3 or 4 different kinds since then.
Yeah, for whatever reason you can't transfer the hoods between the suits.
And my that's arguably the hottest.
Yeah.
It does protect well, but it has the best hood.
Yeah.
And it has been sweat in for numerous years.
Is this the first time you've washed it?
We have thrown it in the washing machine several other times before, but I don't remember having it. It's slowly accumulated black spots. Yeah. And I assumed that it was sort of mold from sweat and sitting in a pile,
honey and sweat,
and it didn't come out in the wash. And so the wife had a similar, I don't forget what it was, and she decided to spray it with some bleach, and it cleaned it right up. And then I got to thinking about that, and so this past weekend, after I got done working the hives, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try this bleach thing. So we sprayed it down while I was wearing it, and then she washed it, and it appeared to have no effect. And I was sort of discouraged because I thought we had gone through this process before with little to no effect. And so then later we're on a Tuesday recording this. So yesterday, while she was gone, I set it aside in the sink and mixed up a bleach water spray bottle of about 50-50 and hit it with a spray bottle and came back, I don't know, an hour or 2 later and checked it. And it was noticeably white. Like you could see the little like rounded edges spray pattern.
The impact of the spray.
In the stained white jacket. And I was like, oh, this is going to work. And so I went through several rounds of that, and then the wife finally got home, and I showed her. I was like, really what I need to do is just like soak it. And so we talked about it, and I ended up finding a 5-gallon bucket and basically mixing up some bleach water in a 5-gallon bucket and just dunking it all in there and soaking it. And it's done really good. It's nice and white again for the most part. I had one sleeve that didn't clean up. I clearly got propolis on it, and the propolis now looks kind of yellowy and gooey again instead of just black
and just
crunchy stuff.
Reminder: propolis is kind of like bee glue. It's tree sap and honey and mostly
on my sleeves. Yeah, mostly on my sleeves where I touch the hive, and then I got to line it across my belly where when you pick up the bottoms of the boxes, they rest up against your.
Yeah, because those boxes are
heavy,
50 and 75 pounds.
I got a little tummy on me. Yeah. So they're still good. And then the hood, I didn't want to wash it because then it's probably get tore up in the washing machine. So I tried to spray it down, and it just didn't take real well. So I then decided that, well, I could wiggle it in the bucket, and then it got a soak, and it did really well too. So
I wonder how my suit. So I have that old suit, and it has exactly that same issue. I also have the newer yellow breathy. I don't know what the name of them is called.
I thought they were. It wasn't Max Air. It was.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
They're a newer yellow suit. They're really nice for just a gentle breeze. As far as temperature wise, they're easier to work in 100-degree weather in. Not easier. But it also has that black goo on it. I wonder if it'll survive a bleach. I usually end up swapping a suit every year.
I think those would do better because they're mostly plastic. That the layers of the material that those are made out of are mostly plastic. So I have a feeling that they would do better than the. If it's going to be a problem at all. I mean, I guess we'll see long term.
Yeah. If it's but anyway, so
I did that. So if you're out there and you've got if you're older equipment and you're showing that, give it a whirl. It'll certainly clean it up. I assume it's still going to hold up. Well, we'll have to kind of tune in later and see whether I'm like it's just bleach, right? Like we've used it on our clothes for years.
we have, but you think you're gonna be able to sneak in an oxalic acid treatment before Thanksgiving or so? Thanksgiving's next week.
I mean, yeah, it's next week. I treated later with my Pro
Formic Pro.
Formic Pro, thank you. And so I figure if that didn't get it from the Formic Pro, then an OVA this time of year is I'm not gaining anything.
Oxalic acid's like a organic acid that you can vaporize. I have a real fancy vaporizer that hooks some batteries into it.
You got version 2. You had version 1 and version 2.
I have version 0 and Fogger, which Fogger doesn't work, and then version 1 and then version 2.
I thought you just said version 1 and version 2.
So the 0 I would count as the car battery with a motorcycle glow plug in a chunk of aluminum.
I was just talking about your fancy one.
Okay, yeah. So the version 1 still requires a car battery, just because you need a power source for it, and then I hook that into an inverter.
Well, so the solar chargers, the solar generators.
I could have probably used one of those too.
Yeah, the solar generators have come a long way since we initially started this, where we were having to do the car battery and the inverter, but now you can get that all packaged in one deal and lightweight.
Actually, the guy I talked to about the hive beetle problems uses exactly that, and he uses the original version.
Yeah.
So last year I purchased the new battery version, which uses
DeWalt battery.
Yeah, whatever flavor actually battery that you want. So it can be DeWalt, it can be whatever you've got the most batteries of. And so I picked one of those, and man, one battery. It says one battery covers like 8 hives. I would say more realistically, it covers like 5 double deeps, easily. But I'll probably hit all of my hives with another dose of oxalic acid, just because I want to get that. Yeah, it might suck, and I want to get those numbers down to as close to 0 as I can.
I think that probably wraps it. Oh, and foam. Yeah, I briefly touched on foam. You haven't put any foam on yet.
I have not. I have not yet. I'll probably be doing that this week.
You gonna use all your bee cozies? You gonna let me use one?
Yeah, I've got some upstairs. I'll loan you one.
I haven't tried one. I always mean to, and I just didn't have picked one up.
I will not be surprised if mice will find their way into your bee cozy.
My barn cats caught a bunny, and then my Labrador then finished the bunny. I had a bunny snack.
Yep, you've got 2 good mousers.
I do have good mousers, but I'm not immune to having mice like my old equipment.
Voles are the ones that chew up my equipment. Mice will get into it and make nests in it, but voles will chew through the wood in order to get into the hive. I have a section of one of my hives.
But you're still on the ground, dude.
No. This is one of my hives that's on a bench that it chewed through.
This wasn't your old equipment you had sitting on?
Not
old equipment on the grass?
No, it had crawled up. Now, and I know it was a vole because I found the dead vole half hanging out of the hive with multiple stingers in his face. I should have taken a picture of it at the time.
Well, I mean, there you go.
He didn't make it, but he did chew a hole through my hive.
So that's what we got going around the yard. I think we'll do a quick Beekeeping 101. We'll continue that from our last podcast. Last podcast we talked about jobs of the hive, and I think we're going to move to talking about the individual parts of the hive, including this week we're going to talk about the queen.
Yeah, the queen cast in the hive. This is kind of like your if you had to give anatomy to the hive, I would say the queen is the heart and probably the reproduction portion of the hive. Not the brains. She doesn't make decisions. Everyone thinks it's great to be queen.
She does, though. It's her pheromones.
That's true.
So a lot of the decisions in the hive are based around pheromone signals.
Yep.
and she puts off the most pheromone of all of the hive.
The main one being the queen mandibular pheromone. That one's you can actually buy little plastic replacement queen mandibular pheromone for like emergency, if you want the hive to be calm still and the queen dies. If you need to like a gap filler, you can buy that stuff.
Like the best swarm capture lure ever.
Kind of, but they're little tiny plastic pieces. I have some somewhere. They're little tiny plastic pieces, and they last for like a week.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's the calming pheromone that she releases through that hive.
So we'll talk about. They start in a special cell, a queen cell. It has to be drawn. It's not on top. It's not in the normal comb of all of the workers because she has to grow. She's much larger than a normal worker.
Yeah, I would say like 50% bigger.
Yeah, and so because of that, she won't fit in the normal cell. So they have to draw a special cell.
Kind of looks like a peanut.
A peanut
cell.
And they can hang off the side of the comb or off the bottom.
Yeah, and realistically, we say that she can't be from a worker. It depends on the situation, right? So if it's an emergency and the queen got squished, say that I'm a dumb beekeeper or whatever.
There was an incident.
It was an incident. I killed my bees, my queen, on accident. And they need to make a new queen. And they haven't been preparing for that. Well, they can convert one of the eggs on the side of the cell into a peanut shape. It's a pretty interesting
process.
Yeah, it kind of sticks out with like a slight little angle, but absolutely they can do that. They tend not to. They would prefer to just make swarm cells.
They like to call those emergency queen cells.
Yeah, those tend to be in the middle of the frames just because they haven't planned for that being a queen.
That's where the eggs were that they harvested. They selected to promote.
Yeah, and then those the larva they promote, but that larva is less than 1 day old. Is ideally. Now, if you're grafting queens, which is a whole different process, that's really hard to see those guys. They're really hard to move.
They're hard to move.
And so usually,
seeing them is not a problem. It's the picking them up and moving them without damaging them that is a real thing.
And that probably deserves like a whole podcast all by itself.
Yeah, we're just going to talk about the queen, sort of as she gets from egg to when she's being a queen.
Right. So her growing period so from an egg she hatches, it's 16 days for her to form from the larva to a hatched queen.
To an emerged queen when she chews out of the cell.
Yeah, that's a good correction. I keep saying hatched. They hatch way early, right?
Yeah, there's always that debate in the beekeeping world, right? They hatch out of an egg and probably emerge out of the cell.
Emerge from a cell, emerge from a cocoon that's in the cell, and then emerge from the cell. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got she's got that special queen cell, and they'll chew out of that at about 16 days. Interestingly enough, it's the quickest of all the developments of the three kinds of bees you find in a hive.
Yeah.
The workers are 21 days, drones are 24, queens are 16. So it's significantly shorter period of time.
And she's bigger. She's bigger than, I would say she's bigger than a drone. She's like 50% bigger than a worker.
And that's because there's only one queen per hive. And so rarely will you find, if left alone, if not intentionally done, the hive will generally raise multiple queen cells at one given time because nature likes, odds are in numbers.
Yeah, they hedge their bets.
And so they'll make multiples of these. And so the first one that hatches wins. So there's been evolutionary pressure over the ages. The first one that emerges will go around and physically attack. They'll chew out the other queens, and that interrupts their development and essentially kills them. And so whoever emerges first wins. And so there's been an evolutionary pressure to reduce the amount of time it takes to raise her down, and we've currently at 16 days.
Yeah, so I've seen this process, and I thought it was pretty interesting. When we say that they chew out the side of the cell, they actually chew a hole in the side of the cell. So like the peanut think about the peanut being long. Like the bottom of the peanut's usually where the queen emerges. Now, if the queen gets that cell first, she'll chew out the side of that cell. Sometimes, I've never seen them sting, but I've heard that they sting the heck out of the queen that's in there to kill her because they're pretty hardcore like that. And then that cell, that queen's dead, and then the rest of the bees will clean that up.
Clean that up. But the remains of the queen cell, if she emerges out of the bottom correctly, it looks like they've taken like a little can opener. They'll chew out the bottom all the way around, a nice flat edge.
The queen chews this out.
Yeah. And from the inside. But then if they attack a queen cell, there's this sort of a jagged hole in the side, not the bottom.
Yeah, it kind of looks like somebody's grabbed it by the side and like kind of tore it out of the side of the frame. It's just there's kind of the remains of the cell because the bees will break that queen cell down and move that wax to other places, within a day or two.
So after we emerge from our queen cell, that's gonna be day 16. We're still gonna be we're gonna wander around the hive. She doesn't feed herself. The nurse bees. So let's back up for a second. I guess I got ahead of myself. Any given egg can be turned into a queen by feeding it only royal jelly. We mentioned last week that all of the bees get fed some royal jelly. The difference here is for a queen, she's only fed royal jelly. The royal jelly is a protein-rich secretion that's excreted from the hypopharyngeal gland. Say that one five times.
Yeah, that's good. It's like a little gland over the top of a bee's eyes. On their head.
And this is a very resource-intensive activity to produce the royal jelly, so they will consume large quantities of both pollen and nectar in order to produce the royal jelly needed to raise a queen.
The bees that produce this are between ages of 5 and 10. It can go longer from what I've read, but it kind of falls off the longer they go.
Those are days old.
Days old, yeah.
So they're
bees.
typically called nurse bees, which is why if anybody out there has played with raising queens or queen grafting, they always talk about your queen builder needing to be heavily stocked with nurse bees, and that's why it takes a ton of energy-intensive nurse bees to create good, high-quality.
Well, we made one this year. I made a queen castle, and usually the easiest way to make a queen castle is find a bunch of cat brood that's just about ready to hatch.
Yep.
And then you pack that hive full of that, and then you throw feeders in there so they don't have to go out and change their roles from like nurse bees into field bees, and then you pack it full of your queen cups, and that's how you make your queens. So
they'll feed that queen the royal jelly. Fun facts: there's like 10,000 bee feeding visits during their development. So on average, it's like every 43 seconds. So it's a lot.
They're checked on. If you've ever stayed in a hospital, I just bring this up because Dad was in the hospital, and he was always constantly being bugged by nurses, right? And not quite every 43 seconds, but if you had somebody mess with you every 43 seconds, make sure you got enough, make sure the temperature's right, make sure you got food, all that stuff. That's what it's like being a bee.
So that continues. So she'll emerge. She still doesn't feed herself. So those same nurse bees will continue to bring her food and feed her. She wanders around the hive, kind of developing, getting her wing muscles developed and things in order before she has to go out for mating flights. So if you wondered how they get mated, then that is actually done outside the hive. She has to leave the precious security of the hive, fly out there in the big world, and she knows where to go to find a drone congregation area. Don't ask us how. We don't know.
Yeah, nobody knows. So if you want to do some research, there you go.
There you go. How do they know? We don't know. It's magic. So she goes to the drone congregation area. Hopefully, she mates with in the teens. 13 to 18, 10 to 20.
10 to 20 is what I normally see.
The number I always heard was you hope for the teens.
Yep.
And if you only make single digits, you're not going to have a well-producing queen. There's research that suggests that the better mated the queen, the more productive layer she will be.
Right. And we actually got to sit through some really good talks for our bee club that had a specialist on queens. And her research even showed that, one, drone quality is getting worse through time. And then two was that a queen will use about 50%. So she stores all of that sperm in a thing called a spermatheca. And that she'll use about half of her stored volume of viable sperm that first year that she's laying.
Laying about 2,000 eggs.
Yeah. 2,000 eggs, her own body weight.
A day.
Eggs a day.
So that's, and that's the thing is, you're like, well, how do you know that more matings is better queens? Well, they go out there and they artificially inseminate a queen, and they only give her like 5, and then they give her the equivalent of 8, and then they give her the equivalent of 10, and so on
by volume.
And then they look at how well they function, how well they produce, how good of a queen do they become. And so through that research, when we say there's research that suggests more is better, that's how they got there.
Yeah, and it's really good research. There's Purdue does quite a bit of it, so that's they've got a really good queen rearing program, and so.
And if you didn't catch it there, I did say that we can artificially inseminate queens, and we do that already because we want to select our drones and from areas that have research areas or areas that if we're trying to breed for traits like our Varroa sensitive hygiene, our VSH, our mite biters, if you've heard that, they want to collect drones from the colonies that show those signs, and then collect the sperm from those drones, and then artificially inseminate queens raised from those same colonies, so that you can further the genetics of those traits.
Right, because that mite biting and the Varroa sensitive hygiene (VSH), as far as traits go, those are recessive traits. So if you don't select for that, you will tend to lose that, which is why I think in the beekeeping world we don't have that. Didn't develop with pressure over time, right? Like as far as Darwinian evolution pressures, right? That is a pressure that does kill bees, but it didn't develop over time because we get a mixture of bees without that.
She'll get mated, and then she comes back. Hopefully, she makes it back from her mating flights. This is probably the most dangerous period of the queen development. You can lose the queen in the mating process. You can lose the queen from predation on her flights to and from.
Locally, I would say like August, September timeframe. Those are you have huge losses if you have queens going out, and it's less than 50% are returning because so many things are looking for a snack. Dragonflies are some of the gnarliest predators out there, and so Riverview Road Apiary being by the river, we have quite a few dragonflies that, especially that time of year, that visit.
You can watch the dragonflies snack on their flying targets. So she makes it back to the hive. It's going to take her another roughly 5 to 8 days to get her ovaries developed. There's actual physical changes that occur in her abdomen. So before she's mated, they call her a virgin, and she's physically a different size.
Yeah, which is something like, as a new beekeeper, I don't think I've ever seen anybody write down or say to me. And so I always thought I was losing my mind when I was like, oh, this queen hatched and she's a virgin, and now I've got this little tiny queen.
Yeah.
And you come back in the hive 2 weeks later, and she's mated, and she's ballooned into this huge monster, right? Like,
yep.
and you go, well, maybe they replaced her. Maybe it's a different queen.
You got to remember that for a long time we didn't know how honeybees could fly based on their power to their wing ratio to weight ratio, because as we understood it, the the power to weight ratios and lift and all that kind of stuff as we understood it. It just the science didn't science.
Yeah.
And
Bumblebees being the worst offenders
Yeah.
of those. Yeah.
And so when we say they're right on the edge of making that physics work, it's to the point where the queens, once they are laying, can't physically fly anymore. Now they can kind of glide like a chicken might glide.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Which is something that your heart stops
Yeah.
because you've screwed up if the queen is gliding anywhere.
Yeah.
And then she just disappears into the grass.
Yeah.
Or your chicken runs over and has a snack, or she flies. She tends to fly like on your clothing where you can't see it, or under your shoe, that kind of thing.
So they do physically. There is a physical change that occurs after they are mated. Their ovaries develop. Her abdomen will extend as she gets ready to lay her first eggs, and then she'll start laying. So if you were keeping track at home, how many days have passed since we went from queenless hive and we selected an egg until we have a new queen laying?
So it's about 3 weeks.
It's more like 4.
It's
Earliest, best case
scenario is 3 weeks.
is 3 weeks, but the reality is
4.
it's often 4.
And then we got to do a little bit more math, because so you've got a queen, you've had a break in there for 4 weeks, right? Because there's no queen laying for that 4 weeks.
Yep.
So how many days was it for an egg to go from egg to a laying worker, or for not laying worker, hopefully not a laying worker, from an egg to a worker?
For our last egg that was laid before something happened to the queen emerges, it was 21 days.
So
which is
21
3
days,
weeks.
right? So, and that's not workers that go out in the field. That is workers that can do stuff kind of around the hive.
So oftentimes as a new beginner, if you lose your queen and you found the queen cell and you've watched that and you have seen it been emerge, well, you probably didn't see it emerge, but you have evidence that the queen cell successfully emerged, like it looks all nice and square at the bottom and not chewed out the side, and hey, great, she got out, she's good. It's still like 2 weeks from that point, and you're like a week after that, your last of your brood hatches, which is your baby bees, and now it looks like nothing's going on in hive, and that's when you really start to get the panic phone calls.
Yeah. And then actually that's an ideal spot to treat for, as we talked about treating for oxalic acid, you treat with oxalic acid right then, because it kills all the mites that are on hitching a ride on top of the bees.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, and kind of rightfully so, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, and I still get panicked when I see that. I know what's happening in the hives. I know that even if it's a hive I walked up to and I'm like, yep, I know exactly where we are right now. Still panicked.
I just did last year is I was convinced I was queenless. I remember calling you up on the phone.
Yeah.
And talking about time frame, and you were like, just give it a week. Yeah. I'm like, dude, but he's like, just give it a week. Give it one more week. I'm like, are you sure you should give it a one more week? And I gave it one more week, and then I got this beautiful queen laying a great pattern.
Yeah. So call your buddy. Get a buddy. You can write us. Hey, this is a situation. I'll tell you. Give it a week.
It's always one more week,
but
unless it's been like 6 weeks.
But this ties to a really important thing, and kind of I think it kind of ties into our next segment for In the News, right? For what we're going to be offering. We don't have a lot of what's going on in the world right now as far as beekeeping news goes.
But we have news about Beekeeping Buddies.
Yeah, we're going to be offering Nucs this year. And
well,
so
we've been thinking about, you know, you've been pushing hard into full-time beekeeping, and we've been kicking around the idea of how can we do pollination services, and we've been kicking that around for 2 or 3 years, and we haven't gotten any traction with it. And it's a really, it seems to be a real uphill battle. Although we're convinced there's benefits to be served in our area, especially since we're the pumpkin capital of the United States.
yeah,
And all pumpkins are pollinator-based pollination. We feel like there's definitely a market in our area, but it's been real rough. And so one of the other things that we struggle with has been our package quality, and we have seen our package quality.
I would say the packages that show up are really good. The queens in the packages cause me heartache.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the guy who's selling them listened, but I've told him, like, it's for me, they replace that queen and I would say 90% of the packages I pick up, they replace that queen.
And I did all your package installs this spring.
Yeah.
And I tried to mark a couple of hives that when I was pulling the queen cages out and putting them in the boxes, like, you look at them and you're like, this one looks like a decent queen, and I only ran into about 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah, now remember, right? We just talked about a lot of those are going to be freshly mated. Right?
I installed 50 for you this spring.
Yeah, because again, I haven't hidden this. Last year, I put Formic Pro in my hives, and I lost like 80 or 90. I think 80% of my hives I lost. That I roasted all of the queens. They didn't have time to requeen. It was heartbreaking for me. So I bought a bunch of nukes or packages, and on my website I also keep track of the number of swarms I caught. Now I include our cutouts in those swarms if I keep the bees. So I have 20 swarms I caught this last year.
Yep.
Which is a good thing because of those 50 packages, I think 10. I believe I have in my notes. I believe 10 survived with the original queen.
As I say, I seem to recall, I was talking about it earlier this summer, that of the ones that were reliably good, they were the ones that I had eyeballed the queen when I looked at her and, like, that's a decent looking queen, just from experience. Like, I can't explain it. Like, if you want me to try to sit here and explain it, I can't do it. Yeah. It's just experience.
From what I've sum it up when people have asked is the way she moves, her lividity,
and sort of her size
and the size. And just how they react to her when she's around.
Now, is that end all be all? Like, if you're gonna get a package and open her up and look at it and be like, oh, this is gonna suck, I want a different one. Like, you can't make that call at that point. But the point is, we had the opportunity. I reached out to some contacts that I made in the beekeeping world, and I asked the person, hey, we're considering trying to find a different reputable supplier for packages, and the person's response was, I don't deal with packages. I said, oh, and I'm like, okay, well, you know a lot of people. You know certainly more people in the beekeeping world than I know. You think you could hook me up with a name for somebody who deals with packages? And he's like, we don't deal with packages where we are. We just deal with nukes. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, but, tell me about what you were paying and how many you were buying. So I filled in that information. He's like, yeah, we can do that. Yeah. I'm like, you can do what? He's like, I'll supply you with nukes for that number for that price. And I'm like, but we were getting our packages in April. He's mid-April. And he's like, yeah, that's our time frame. Yep. So these are coming from the south, where most of the early spring bees come from.
Where they have to. And they're realistically, when they're coming from the south, they're coming off of almonds, moving to the south, and they're putting queens in them. And doing splits, putting queens in them. And they've got at least, so again, they're laying queens. So going back to our math that we just did, right? We're 5 feet. They've been in there for at least 5 weeks. And realistically, probably longer than that, just because they've got a colony. And we've seen pictures of them. They're strong hives.
I trust the source. I've seen what he puts out there in the beekeeping world, and he always has got strong 3 frames of brood nukes with a frame of feed, and he's going to supply them in pro nukes, which are the plastic semi permanent. I certainly have mine from.
I use them for
5 or 7 years ago. They've been sitting around in the yard. Like
swarm capture. They're like a swarm capture sort of thing. They're not going to grow huge off of those.
No,
they'll need to be transferred out.
But my point is, it's not a waxed cardboard box either.
It is not. It is usable. They are usable for a long time.
For making splits, moving frames around the yard, for carrying frames around if you don't want to drop a queen off a frame if you're making a split. Going out and collecting the frames out of a swarm capture out in the field. I've moved the frames over and restocked the frames in the box in the tree without taking it out of the tree. Because the nice thing about those is they close up tight. They
close up tight enough that the bees aren't flying all over
around.
the place.
And I don't know if I can say that for all of my my swarm traps.
Yeah.
So that's how they're coming. Where those are pre-sales are available on the River Road Apiary website.
Yep, we'll throw links down below. They're $200. It's a third one down. Or if you're on Facebook, I'm going to be putting out a reminder every week until February, when I think we need our final numbers.
Yep. Valentine's Day was our day we're cutting it off.
So yeah, I'll put out a reminder every week. But packages are something that I think the beekeeping community is kind of polarizing. So I thought we'd take a minute to go through some of the pros and cons of packages. So let's go through like the cons first. I said packages. Nucs. You can use both. Nucs or packages.
We can start because we're gonna compare and contrast.
Yeah, let's do a compare and contrast of the two. So let's start with packages, right? So the packages, some of the cons with packages, right? We already covered it. Is that queen is thrown in with a bunch of bees that she doesn't know, which is why you can't do a direct release into there, right? They'll kill her. So, or you could, depending on how long she's been with them, but more than likely they'll kill her.
Yeah, if she's coming from California and she's been on the truck for 4 days, is a different story than if she was packaged up, a day and a half before and just off the truck.
Right. So then another issue with them is you don't know that queen's laying pattern, right? She was plucked out of a hive. You can't take a look at it and see what she's been doing. So
to suggest she came out of a hive might be generous. She may have just come out of a mating nuke.
Yeah. You don't really know her background there. So that's another con there from my perspective. Another one is if you don't have wax drawn, then they have to draw the wax first before they can really start laying. Now, can they draw a frame of wax in a day? Yeah, probably not. They can get to. We actually have a video back when Val was on that showed bees drawing a frame of wax, and I believe that has the timestamp on there. So I'm not sure exactly how long that took, but in order for them to actually draw the wax foundation and then get the eggs in there, this is if you're starting out. You have a time frame delay in there, and that is gonna set you behind. So again, right? Let's say it's 2 days. Let's say it's 3 days to get an area where they can lay and actually have eggs and stuff. That's it sets you behind 3 days. You're still talking about eggs at that point, and we're still talking about the eggs have to hatch into workers, and then you have workers to start over. So in order to get a balance, right? I don't know off the top of my head how many days that is, but I would guess it's from egg to actually getting a working population. You're talking about a month or so.
Yeah, usually it's at least one round of brood that's been laid in that hive, so at least 3 weeks. Usually it's more like a month.
Yeah.
The nice thing about in contrast, the nuke with a 5-frame nuke with 2, maybe 3 frames of brood. As a reminder,
yeah, go ahead.
There's 6,700 cells on a deep frame.
So that's one, and that's an important number to keep in mind. That's one whole frame, and which a nuke should have. A nuke should have 3 frames of brood, roughly.
Roughly 3.
Yeah.
So not only are you getting bees like on the surface of the obviously surrounding all of the frames of the nuke, but you also have the equivalent of another 3-pound package of bees in the frames ready to hatch within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Right. And you already have an advantage there of the 1 to 2 weeks. The other portion of that is that we talked about the jobs that workers have, and they actually divide the work up into those different jobs within that worker caste, and you already have with a nuke the division of the bees into the labor that's required.
Well, yeah, a lot of those jobs are age specific, right? We just talked about the royal jelly being a 5 to 10 day old bee, and that's because the energy intensity that's required to produce that royal jelly, and again, it's not just raising queens. All larvae is fed some amount of royal jelly.
Yeah,
and so by having a mix of ages of bees, now you could make some argument that when they shake that packet, they shake the box of bees, you're getting a mix of all of the ages of the bees. But the nice thing about the nuke is that it's already like they're established. These guys are doing this job in this box already.
Right. And it's, yeah, and you have the right percentage of everybody. So the percentages for a swarm, right? A swarm capture has the right percentages of those bees in that swarm to create a new colony. This is a new colony. So I really think packages have a huge step up in that regard.
Nukes.
Sorry. Nukes have a, thank you. Thank you.
Now, on the con side,
Yep.
There's a lot less regulation associated with shipping and moving packages around the country than nukes, and that's because most of the problematic bee diseases are associated with the comb that the bees are in, the brood and the comb,
Or the brood, yeah.
and the pollen that's in the frames. And so the accepted understanding is that if you eliminate all of the comb from the equation, you wind up with much less disease transfer from location to location because it's just bees in a box,
Right.
and nothing else.
Right. And then also pesticides, right? Pesticides are lipophilic, so they like fat, and beeswax is lipid. So you'll get a higher concentration. You're going to get a higher concentration of pesticides in old comb. And so that old comb, that comb that you're getting is some of it's going to be old, and it's going to have a higher concentration of pesticides in it.
And I guess that's the real question: is how old is that comb? If it's coming from commercial producers, my guess is the majority of those frames are not going to be the old clapped out frames that a lot of us hobbyists are still
They shouldn't be.
are still trying to struggle to reuse, because you can't bring yourself to throw away those beautifully drawn frames that are dark and they always seem to love to lay in. But the reality is, they really do like fresh comb, and they really do seem to do better on fresh comb than the really old dark stuff. Now, dark stuff might have a use as a swarm capture device, but in terms of raising healthy, booming hives, they seem to really do the best on new foundation, new comb. And I bet the stuff that shows up in these is going to be nice white, year or two old tops.
Yeah, maybe a
frames.
little yellow. Bees have dirty feet. It doesn't take long to go from white to a nice pretty little yellow. But I agree. For nukes, for those of you that don't buy from us, if you're looking at a nuke and you get into it and it's like black comb, then that's something that,
because that was,
you could still buy the nuke. I would just swap that out.
yeah, because that was always one of the things that people would want to scare. Any guy selling packages is going to claim that nuke is going to get all the hand-me-down frames, all the nasty old frames, that they could swap out of the hive, because he's doing exactly what we said with swapping out frames, and instead of culling those and throwing them in a fire or whatever, he's trying to make some money off of selling them to somebody else. I don't think that's going to be the case for ours, based on the documentation that this individual puts out on the web.
Yeah. The other thing it comes with, ours have a certificate of inspection. And we'll have ours inspected by our state inspector.
And so to offset, you'd be like, okay, so how do you, what can you do to offset that concern if you're moving wax around, full colonies around, and that's with inspections. And so they'll come with an inspection sheet on his end, and then our local bee inspector to our area we've already been in touch with them, and he will certainly be on site to look through them and give his sign off on what he thinks of them when he reviews them.
Yeah. So as far as outside of diseases, Varroa are always a concern. What are the other things that is there any other cons in picking up a nuke?
You could say that the mites can come with either version because you've shake your hive into your 3-pound box. All of your phoretic mites, which we'll just use that word because we've always used it, the ones attached to the bees are still going to be attached to the bees. So you may show up with a bunch of mites in your package. You don't know unless you do a test, and nobody wants to sacrifice 300 bees of their 3-pound package the day after they install it. You could bring a small hive beetle that could be hitched and ride in the package just as well as they could be in your nuke. So in terms of the other problematic, other than your brood diseases, your AFB and your EFB and things like that, your other problematic items, your small hive beetle and your varroa mites, I don't see either one as more problematic for one than it is for the other.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Now you can get breeding varroa in one hive. In the nuke, you could have breeding varroa technically in the brood because that's how
the cells. Yeah,
underneath the cells. That's where they breed. But I don't think it's a major issue, and you can always treat, right? It's something that can always be done.
I think you could probably make the argument that with the head start you get from the nuke, it would the hive as a whole would be in a much stronger position 1 month later and ready to accept a treatment quicker without risk of significant damage to the hive.
Yeah.
A month after you install it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
So, like, if you're looking, okay, I'm going to treat either one, your nuke is probably going to have an advantage of being farther along and being in a better position to take the treatment better, at that point.
Yeah. And then the other con with nukes usually in our area is that usually they don't arrive until March.
You mean
May. Or
they're several weeks behind
mid-May
when you can get a package.
Right. And so the benefit of us bringing these in from the south is that they'll be here.
We're currently
April.
anticipating a time frame for us that would be in line with when our packages have typically arrived in our area.
Right. So
and then of course the last one, which we haven't touched on, price.
Oh, right.
There is a premium for the 5-frame nuke over the package, but you are getting a lot more for that price. In our area, packages were running $150 last year.
Yeah, I think 150. It might have been
130,
35,
135 to 150. I thought Farm and Fleet was up in the 160, 170.
Farm and Fleet was in the 160, 170. And if you're thinking about buying packages from Farm and Fleet, please give me a call because I'd really like to understand the thought process behind that.
We feel like there's probably other suppliers that would probably give you better service and a better product.
Right.
So it's in the past, our nuke suppliers in this area, if they were getting relatively locally raised nukes, you were looking at mid-May because you had to overwinter your stock and then make a split and then build that for about a month. And so because of that, they were usually carried a pretty hefty premium up in the $250 range. And so with our price point at $200, we feel it's real competitive with a package, and what you get for the nuke and the time frame, it's going to put you a month ahead. We didn't talk about that in terms of how how quickly the hive is going to be able to build. The consensus is it'll put you about a month ahead in the time frame, almost the equivalent of an overwintered hive.
Right. So overall, this is something that Steve and I have talked about a lot, and I think we're going to try this out this year.
We've talked about trying to raise our own queens early, or trying to get queens and make splits early and sell nukes about the same time frame, because we felt like there was a gap in the area for high quality queens.
Yeah, and nukes. And so we tried it some last year, and basically we're largely outcompeted by people that just wanted packages.
Yep.
And so, and if depending on who you ask, this is again one of those things in beekeeping. Depending on who you ask, if you ask the local inspector is going to say, "No, I want packages, not nukes," because he's very afraid of the diseases that can be spread by it. And I understand his fear. However, this is not. I do not think this is going to be a major issue or concern.
So to address that, this sort of ties into our last note and from last week's last episode when we were talking about our AFB vaccine. We are also actively have in the works. We have initiated the process of acquiring a vial of the AFB vaccine, and if we can get all of the dominoes to fall in place, then our hope is that we can value add to these nukes the ability to have them treated with the AFB vaccine as a value add on top of the base price. And that's going to largely depend on whether or not we can actually get a hold of. They'll sell us some of the vaccine, and then we've done some sort of back of the envelope research about whether or not we can determine what the actual application, like how do you actually apply it, and what's the dose, and how do you do it. And so far we're coming up a little short on that information, so we have to get that tracked down and make sure we have the logistics for that set up. So there's some more work on that on our end, but that's why we're starting now, 4 months out. But we hope that if we're successful in that front, we feel like it's worth the time and effort to put into it, because it is a way to put to rest concerns about the spread of AFB and EFB if we can get those queens and nukes vaccinated.
Yeah, and it provides also anything I can do to join in the fight against varroa mites. It's also supposed to help with that. So
yep.
let's
deformed wing virus.
Deformed wing virus. We're going to do that.
And for those of us who have battled it locally, it's a great. I'm interested in having it personally because of my battles with EFB, and so I'm personally invested in trying to get that working for the small number of hives that I maintain. Luke is of the opinion that it might be prohibitively expensive, and
I also believe that
when he talked out the math, it made sense. His math made sense. We haven't actually gotten any prices on anything, but when he suggested how be prohibitively expensive, we spitballed some numbers, and the numbers we came up with were, I could see why you would need to go on a larger basis than a ones and twosie for a backyard operation to make this worthwhile.
Yeah, but we're going to find out. That's what we do. Steve and I are good at running into issues and figuring out maybe it's not worth it.
We're going to bring you all guys along. So we're going to keep you. We'll keep you informed on how it's going, and because while Luke is certainly making a run at doing a business at this, our goal here is to make beekeeping information. That's why we're doing the podcast, right? Is we're giving information back to the community, and if we can give back to the community and help get better bees out there for the hobbyists, then help solve long-running problems for the beekeeping community, we're all in.
Yeah.
I don't think we had any questions. We had a basic question from your IQI meeting visit. You want to talk briefly about
ISBA.
ISBA?
Illinois State Beekeeping Association.
We had our annual meeting.
Had the annual meeting. I went to it. I did not enter any of my products into the honey contest, although we did have a local winner that won like 3 or 4 categories from between us and SIBA.
Yeah.
So that was really big. But one of the questions that was brought up, they had 2 speakers, Bob Benny, excellent YouTube show, and he's been a beekeeper for a long time. And the other one is Dr. Jamie Ellis. Heard him speak a few times. Really interesting stuff on queens, actually. And he actually runs the Florida, I think University of Florida, research facility for beekeeping.
And you guys need to stay tuned because we talked to both of them about being on the podcast. So
yeah, I'm gonna try and make that happen.
Over winter here when we're less in the yard and we're gonna do more sit around the table and talk about stuff. I think that's a perfect opportunity to bring in some guests. So stay tuned, guys.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that they were thrown from the crowd was one on frames being full of pollen or being pollen bound. So as a beekeeper, you're often heard of like honey bound, but here in Illinois, we have a really interesting, unique situation where you can become pollen bound.
I wouldn't have said it's unique, but then again, I've only beekeeped in the Midwest.
They were both baffled by it, right? And so those are both beekeepers from Florida and further southern U.S., and they had never heard of anything like it. So basically, honey bound or pollen bound means the bees have gone, they filled up every space, the flow is great, flowers are doing great, and they filled up everything, and the queen no longer has a place to lay, or her spaces to lay are very, very small. It usually results in swarming, and they have a really difficult time recovering because, they need queen cells, and they don't always have queen cells for it, or the queen cells the population's too low to recover from that really well. So for honeybound, I've actually been honeybound. Last year was one of the first times I got honeybound on one of my hives. I got behind. And so that one's super easy to fix. You yank some frames of honey, you yank some frames of pollen, you yank some frames of bees, you throw it in a nuke, and you've got a new hive. It fixes your honeyboundness by opening up those places for the bees. The pollen, now, bees will usually eat that honey. They'll consume enough of that honey. The pollen, they have a really hard time seeming to consume enough.
Well, it's usually only fed to most of it's consumed for brood.
Right.
So if you don't, as you constrict the brood nest,
yeah,
and so she has less and less space to lay, you have less and less brood to feed, and you're still bringing in massive amounts of pollen because it's that time of year. And so it's the cycle sort of snowballs downhill, and it sort of gets worse because you're bringing in more pollen, but you're using less because you have less brood to feed. And so you can wind up in a situation where you definitely have way more pollen built up than you should have.
Yeah, and I have a theory on it that actually it coincides with swarming season. So we have really big pollen bursts here during that time of year. And so my theory is that you have a dip in that population of new bees. So everything works out correctly, but you've got a booming hive, and as the bees hatch, they just fill behind. And so all of a sudden you get a new queen that's hatched. She comes back, and we filled everything with pollen and or nectar. And in this situation, it's pollen because we have limited consumption of it.
Remember that we had that 2-week, 3-week period where there was no, at least a 2-week period where you have almost no brood in the hive while we're still making a new queen. And it's a perfect opportunity for your booming hive to backfill everything with resources.
And as I'm sitting here thinking about this too, the hive that I've had this happen to me on, I actually had put a queen excluder on because I was looking to cut comb above it. So I wonder if they run out of spaces just totally spaces, right? Because all they're putting above is honey, and then everything below is pollen. So how do you fix this, right? That's the real, $10,000 question or $1 million question or whatever you want to call it. And the easiest way to fix it is treat it just like a honey-bound hive, in my opinion. You're going to remove it. Now, you're going to have a lot of pollen. And the answer they gave on stage was, well, just move that pollen to your other hives. Well, in this situation, usually every hive is packed with pollen.
There's no reason why the other hives in the row of your apiary aren't going to have the same issue.
And they may not be. They may not be, but usually they are. And so what I would do is I would split that hive up into nucs, and in those nucs, go through and balance it out and give them some more space. Now, say you don't want a nuke. I still am of the opinion that by making a nucleus colony, right, 5-frame nuke, 6-frame, whatever you're going to make, I think you should have 1 or 2 nukes in your yard. Even if you have 1 or 2 hives, I would do a nuke per hive. It's probably a lot. It's probably on the high end for most people. And the question is, well, what are you going to do after that? Well, after it develops, if you have a problem, you almost always have a problem. You can do a recombined, right? We've talked about doing a recombined, or you can reach out to somebody and be like, "Hey, I'm selling these nukes. I don't need them, and they come from good stock, and be real honest. This is what happened, and I have to sell them." So there's all kinds of things you can do with those. That would be my 2 cents. What would you do, Steve? You got that pollen bound?
When we were pre-gaming, you also mentioned throwing some in the freezer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so if you went ahead and let's say you've got 4 or 5 hives, and plus 2 nukes is enough for you. That's great. But you still got 2 hives worth. You got still another 4 to 6 frames that you want to pull out. That's a perfect time to throw them in the freezer. Freeze the pollen. It needs to be frozen. Do not try to refrigerate it. Do not try to just set it aside. It spoils really quickly. It molds very quickly.
It's a protein.
It attracts mice and other problematic pests very quickly.
Small hive beetle love a frame of pollen.
So don't think you can just set it aside in an empty box and get to it tomorrow or the next day. Take it directly out of the hive, brush your bees off, and then take it inside and throw it in the freezer and freeze it. And then it can stay in there for months. And if and when you need pollen later, you can put it back on.
And just in case you're worried that those beetles will survive or the eggs will somehow survive, they don't survive freezing. So when you're doing that, you're eliminating any of the pests that exist in there. Now, if you had AFB or EFB and it's in that pollen, you freezing it will not eliminate those. Yeah. I just want to be real clear about that. It will not do that. But a healthy hive, you can 100% freeze that and feed it back.
Yep. So that's, if you've come across that, that's something you can do for that. Droning on, where we talk about what's coming up in the around the yard and beekeeping world in the next 2 weeks. It's that time of year where we really don't have a lot we're going to do. I was taking a hard look at my woodenware as I was putting it up this year. I've got some honey supers that were used when I bought them back in 2010, and that was 14 years ago. And they're at the end of life, man.
Yeah.
They're looking as sad as I've seen equipment, and I think it's finally time to cull some woodenware.
It's always heartbreaking though, because that stuff. Some of that, I still have my original yellow hive that I've got in my picture from when I started. Is it a little bit worn? It's worn, but getting rid of some of that stuff is like, if for whatever reason for me, it's throwing away a piece of your history, and it has to be done. But
it's
still
rotten.
sad.
It's all the finger joints are starting to fall apart.
Yeah, that's the worst.
But I mean, I've seen those supers produce a ton of honey, and they were always my go-to supers.
What if we cut them down and make spacers with them?
We could do that. I mean, I've got other woodenware around the yard that we could do that with. I mean, I think these boxes are. I've got my use on them. I've got my.
These are bound for the fire pit.
I think these are going to be kindling, and which means I've always been a buy unassembled and build. And you were talking about the great deals that will be coming up from the Honeybee Expo in January.
Yep.
If you haven't gotten your tickets, check that out. Honeybee Expo down in Kentucky. That's going to be January 6th through the 2nd through the 6th, I believe.
Yeah, right after New Year's.
Right after New Year's, like immediately after New Year's. And they'll have some great sales on woodenware down there. And so, I don't know, I anticipate picking up some new woodenware if I don't have some upstairs in the barn already.
Woodenware and the speakers are good. I was checking out that list. If we don't get anything back from the group that we messaged about the vaccine, they're actually going to be there, so I'll corner them. I'm not shy.
I think we're going to. You're going to take the podcasting setup in the hotel room and interview some people, right?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
The wife's coming with me. Our English bulldog named Bee, nicknamed Bee. Bernadette's her actual name. She'll be coming with me. So if you guys are coming down there and you want to get some bulldog pets in, she's amicable to being pet by anybody. So. We'll be down there.
I think that about wraps it up for this episode, guys. We appreciate you listening. And remember, go out there and work your hives with your buddy. Thanks for listening.